I thought I found the best barber in town. Turns out I stumbled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Mr. Fiskel has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He's an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that makes me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He's not a big guy, maybe $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leaves them on the top so whoever I'm sleeping with has a potential to play with and neaten up my sideburns. I can't grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me too. The best part is, he does all of it for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp and make a good impression. Everything other than that paid nothing or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile, and I needed a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That is where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid, my dad used to moan the fact. He made jokes about going to the barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turns into a shapeless mass. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying he would take me to the barber. Fiskel's Hair and Beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to see their prices, Mr. Fiskel looked up and smiled at me over the pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then, suddenly, took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, I asked if everything was okay. "Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut. Am I right?" I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on that first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on the top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on until finally it was done. He had cut it just right. The perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. "Come on," I said. "You gotta charge me something." "I let my customers pay what they can afford," he said. "So whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip." I was okay with that and walked out with a free haircut while Mr. Fiskel waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for that job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Fiskel, I left him a $20 tip and told him it was all thanks to him that I had gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years, I always went to Mr. Fiskel when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to Fiskel's. Promotion interview at work, Fiskel's. I told friends about his shop. I went there just to get a touch-up and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Fiskel and I were friends. He liked the same sports team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great. And I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly cut, telling Mr. Fiskel about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed. And when he turned me around to look into the mirror, it was the same way I had gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him $10, and told him I'd see him soon. "Of course," Mr. Fiskel said, sweeping up the hair. "Come back anytime." I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, and they had cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came in, taking them off my head and setting them down at the station Mr. Fiskel used. No problem, I thought. I'll just go back and get them. I stepped in, saying I'd forgotten my sunglasses and was just going to grab them. And that's when I saw him. Mr. Fiskel was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair that he had swept up off the ground like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lips. He stood up, wiping himself off, brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. I know how this looks, and I'll admit that yes, I was eating your hair. But you have to understand, your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair. Well, I used to. Now, I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, he shouted, getting up as he stalked towards me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you? There's nowhere in this town that you would get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let's just go back to, but I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over and eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth. And I would wake up in a cold sweat. I know, it's not a particularly scary thing, but it freaked the hell out of me. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouth. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew her pigtails, and it bred a lifetime phobia in me. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig. A weird collection of phobias, but they're mine. It only took a couple weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks, my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a 20 out of his own wallet and told me to get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like whenever I was in one, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling. And when I looked up, I could almost catch a glimpse of Mr. Fiskell. He was gone when I looked, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse. I only left the house to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out, and I decided I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to get to the master cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday. I had the day off, and I had chores to do before I got to the business of relaxing. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream, a dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the barber chair at Mr. Fiskell's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking me if it was too tight. I didn't say anything. I was too scared to speak. And as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulder itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hands. Not a lot, just leavings, like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight, the top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was. I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I called the landlord, had the locks changed, and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Fiskell, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them. They didn't believe a word of what I've told them. And as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time and just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up with another fresh haircut. I called the police, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Fiskell, and I told them right where his shop was. but they looked less amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had been to talk to him yet and told them he hadn't been there for 3 years, but they just told me that it hadn't been funny the first time and that it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Fiskel's has never been open. It was a prop for the city's revitalization project, like Cooley Flowers across the street from it or Green Butcher beside it. It's a set dressing. It's never open. Mr. Fiskel was a guy who owned a barbershop in the 20s. He's dead. There is no Fiskel who cuts hair. They left, and that left me very rattled. Mr. Fiskel isn't a ghost. I know that. I have friends who go to him. I have felt him touch me. He's flesh and blood, just like I am. I'm sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real, but if he isn't Mr. Fiskel, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have a window in my room, but it's barred with a piece of broom handle and I live on the 3rd floor. I changed the locks again. I wedged a chair under my door, and when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald. Not buzzed, not at a 0 guard, but bald. Like someone shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow, and my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I didn't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They wouldn't believe me. I can't call the landlord. He's replaced the locks twice now and is getting angry about it. I can't afford to move. I can't leave my job. I'm stuck. What I did find, however, was a message left on my nightstand. I'm sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it, and it's written in a heavy hand like a kid's scribblings. It's done on the back of an ad for Fiskel's hair and beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't, it makes no difference. I know where to find you. Serving the wrong customer at the Lone Star Diner can get you killed, or worse. There's a reason we're paid so well, and it has to do with the man who keeps returning. I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has of course been changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I'm aware you probably aren't asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is freaking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out to a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $50 an hour, and that hourly rate is due to one single solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you: because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules, like some areas in the restaurant, need to be spotless at all time. Others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly, but not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghost rules extend to the cooks as well. If you were somehow secretly celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible, not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision, mediocrity? You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought to them at medium speed, with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but screw me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse mouth, more of a skeptical side eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Said it on your first day, you gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you'd better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right, high expectations. You think I'm joking? No, ma'am. Why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems fair. Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I'm sorry? I'm your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure, but you should be aware there's plenty more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced down at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So, the call's notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. You know what? That was fine. She wanted me to put my head down and just do the work. I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun. My coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I found a place to park the failures of my life, a place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s, it seemed. A reasonably calm smile, normal looking dude. Started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately, I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. Important rules, she said. What? You remember our chat about the rules? Well, this is the most important one. Okay? That man over there, in the corner. She motioned to the man who had caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, coy smile across his face. You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him. But he's a customer? Her hold intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table. You don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you do not approach him. You do not take his order. Or a sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. It's different every time, but it ain't pretty. I watched him from the short distance I'd been afforded. It was hard not to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. Felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I tried to squeak in the odd question of my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with, I don't know. And if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day, boss lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by the foundational curiosity that I couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir. What brings you in?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. "Clever." I said, "What brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me? The man sounded exactly how he looked. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?" "Nope." I was good. "And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels as if no one has taken my order for quite some time now." I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was just there. He's here, and he's gone. And the odd, when we really needed to say it, I feel really weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right, in the moment, to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed, agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss, if you have a few." "The big boss? Sure, yeah. Coming in. Just, if you don't mind me asking, who is..." She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me. Questions equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, ma'am." We maneuvered to the back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in, the aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes and papers and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted, like a deer in headlights, no concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then he turned to Melanie. "How long she been here?" he asked her with his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her, yes." He let his eyebrows say, "If you say so," then went on with it. "All right, so apparently you had a visit from the wandering man last week. You," he said, monitoring to Melody, "were out. But you," attention now shifted to me, "weren't. Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man?" The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity. Like maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the bet." "Wandering man," the agent cut her off, "is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment." "I'm sorry?" I asked. "That's correct. The state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation. The wandering man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomena we discovered many years ago. At the time, he just walked the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all hunky-dory, a little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things, grisly things." I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? "Have you guys, taking him in for... I almost wanted to cut my own stupid question, but he ran with it. Nope, not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe. The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture. We have reason to believe that he's a visitor, he said. I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers, spaced out and seated amongst the eatery, were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end of the month window the wandering man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, 5 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here, and it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, but not because of the pay. I'm actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now, the ones who understood the vague terms of the situation, just as Melanie, I, and all former employees did, stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener, mega keener. He bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role, for a guy his young age, was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things with this diner that are strange. Rules you will have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the wandering man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till. If we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I'd first started. He recoiled in surprise. "Remember that little chat about rules we just had?" I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead, with what I believed at the time, no real reason to be here. And I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him. Don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he was holding in his left hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "Just doing garbage duty, ma'am," he said, but understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table to ask them." The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all. Truly." Even more laughs, but no one bit. And yet he continued, pointedly, "I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered the diner's side door, a door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast, and yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly, as if there was a moment, a single solitary second, where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway, adopting a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a low, miserable, tired man and said, 30 visits, terrible service every time, in a pathetic tone, just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him bring up something for you. What are you? And then Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The man started to get up from the table, and then immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the Wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone. Nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. Alert level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised. And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commutes home or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debriefs with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. Where was he taken to? Answered with, he's gone now, with a perpetual dagger in my soul now. I only had the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be more watchful, even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diver, no exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it really wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door. In the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift, I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then he was right there, standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled. Don't worry. I have my own little set of rules I play by, he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now. I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species. Please just go. I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right? I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not. He laughed. The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, this little charade I'm playing. It's just so unbelievably fun. Please don't kill me. Please. You truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time. A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes. I'll come back with a new game. And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, I brought him back, just like you wished. The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there's really nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, open by sky. Someone could drop in anytime. Beneath the town's calm facade, an ancient evil lies dormant. The boy's curiosity awakens the evil, unleashing hell upon Earth. My friend Tim and I were friends as long as I could remember. We hung out together all the time. Almost every waking moment, we'd either be playing games in the yard, riding bikes, or just exploring interesting areas in our small town. The freedom we had was unprecedented, especially for the current times. Our little town seemed untouched by the rest of the world, a fact that my parents reveled in. We heard stories about how things were in bigger cities, so we lived up the freedom we had in the safety of our small town. Although we came to learn one year that not all danger comes from the expected places. One day, we decided to build a treehouse. Our backyard was a decent size and had one large but desolate tree. Someone had carved something at the base that looked like the initials that lovers would make. We thought nothing more of it. Tim and I were climbing it for the millionth time when I had my treehouse epiphany. Tim was more than ready to help me beg my dad to build our fortress of solitude. It would be a sanctuary for our boyish ways, and my dad was more than excited to have a project to do. Besides, any excuse to dodge mom's to-do list seemed like a good idea to him. So dad got to work, and I noticed that while he seemed excited to build our treehouse, he got these funny looks from time to time. Whenever I asked, he'd change his expression real quick and say something like, "I'm fine, just thinking about what I need to do next." Yet, I couldn't shake this feeling that he was lying to me. It didn't take very long for him to finish the treehouse. Oddly, he seemed to get hurt a lot in the process, which was especially weird for him. While he worked hard and diligent, he was also a careful man. Perhaps he felt pressured to make it perfect for us. Yeah, that was it. One night, I got up to use the bathroom and heard muffled talking from my parents' bedroom. Being the stereotypical nosy kid, I tiptoed to their door as close as I would dare. Some words were muffled, but this was the gist of the conversation. "Telling you, there's something weird about that tree. Honey, you're just tired. You've been working on this thing nonstop. You should have taken a break." "That's just it. I'm not tired. In fact, every time I went out there, it was like I got this weird surge of energy." "You're just excited too." "No, that's not it. I'd be dead tired from work and I'd just go there to look at the progress. When I would get near the tree, it was like something was calling me. And suddenly, I'd feel energized. And don't look at me like that. I'm not crazy. I'm not saying that. Actually, I did feel something weird about that tree when I went out there to check on you." Gives me the creeps, but I can't just stop making the treehouse because I get a weird feeling. The guys are so excited about it. Maybe I'm more tired than I realized. I continued on to the kitchen as I heard my father's footsteps, not wanting for him to catch me. After getting back to bed, I went over what they said. My dad was not the kind to be superstitious or get weird vibes, but it was totally out of his character. But nevertheless, I eventually found myself falling back into a deep sleep. I awoke to a strange sound, softly stirring in my bed, slipping from my covers. I sauntered about my room and I realized the source of the noise. With a gulp, I approached my window and heard what seemed to be humming. My treehouse was within line of sight, but the sound wasn't coming from there. I looked down and gasped when I saw a group of men circling at the bottom of the tree. A fire roared in the center of kindling, and they chanted in a hushed tone. My throat closed up, and I tried to scream, but something wouldn't let me. "Get away! Help!" I willed my vocal cords to say, but nothing worked. I stumbled out of my room, trying to make it to my parents. My hand touched the doorknob just as I felt something pull me to the ground. I grunted in pain and looked back to see a horrible creature leering back at me, showing rows of serrated teeth from a vertical mouth. It had no eyes, yet I knew it was staring into my very depths. My screams muted. I thrashed to get away from the horrid thing that would surely take me to my ill demise. The thing only dragged me faster, and I felt every bump of the stairs as it dragged me out of the house. The grass burned the bare skin of my back as it pulled me into the backyard. Arms of multiple men grabbed me and bound me with leather rope. They sat me up just in time to witness something that will never leave my memory. Hanging from the ropes of the tree branch were both of my parents. Hands held my head still, forcing me to look at their bloated blue faces as they swung back and forth with my treehouse as a backdrop. The creature came back into my view, and the men began chanting fervently as it opened its mouth wide and engulfed my head right before I woke in a sweat and began crying immediately. Being at the age of 10, I made the unspoken pact to never get upset at nightmares again. This, however, was an exception. Never had a dream felt so real before. It took my parents a while to calm me down, and it was almost an entire week before I stepped foot near that tree. When Tim and I eventually saw the inside of our treehouse, all my thoughts of that horrible dream went to the back burner. My dad had hung up all the decorations we had planned, and it was nothing less than awesome. I practically jumped off the ladder to hug my smiling dad as he hugged me back and smiled. His eyes darted upward to the treehouse, and I saw a glimmer of dread in them. Tim and I spent every morning in the treehouse together. One of the first things we figured out was how to communicate without my parents knowing. If I was ever confined in my room, he would sneak over to the treehouse and talk to me through a tin can phone. This might sound more dubious than it really was, but our backyard lined up with his backyard, so it's not like he was getting far from the safety of his home. He'd go to his backyard to play and slip through the fence to get to the treehouse. Whether I was in trouble or our parents thought we needed a little away time, we had a system to work around, and it was a good thing we did, because 3 months later, I got the flu. Ted and I spent more time than ever talking through a tin can phone, and we even rigged up a clothesline with a small bucket so we could share video games, comics, and anything else you could think of. My mom would kill me if she knew we were doing it. She was really concerned that I would get him sick. We of course didn't care, because I needed new things to do being stuck in my room. One night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard sound coming from the tin can. I dismissed it at first, since it would pick up things like squirrels or the wind if there was a drafty day, but it persisted, and I brought the tin can to my ear. "Hey, Tim?" There was an eerie silence on the other end, but I swear I could hear movement. So I tugged on the clothesline, hoping to rattle the bucket to get his attention. I held the line for a moment until I felt a familiar tug back. I picked up the tin can and said, "Hey, what are you doing in there?" "Sorry," I heard Tim whisper. "I was trying to be quiet so your parents didn't hear me. I have something for you." I watched as the bucket slowly came into my view and held up my hands to grab it. Strangely, I noticed that there was no light coming from the treehouse. He really went into stealth mode for this one, I thought as I unclipped the bucket, placing the metal container down as softly as I could. I reached in and pulled out a Ouija board? I gasped and quickly put it back in the bucket. My parents had warned me to never mess with them. Whether you believe in spirits and demons or not, you could open yourself up to some bad stuff. It simply wasn't a risk worth taking. "Tim, why'd you send me this?" I said, my harsh tone evident. "You don't want to play with it?" Tim said. "No, those things can be dangerous. Plus, I'll get in huge trouble for messing with them." "Oh, come on, it'll be fun." I stopped for a second, thinking of how weird this was. Tim was definitely acting weird, and now that I thought about it, he was never interested in Ouija boards. Why would he suddenly want to send one to me? I couldn't stand the idea of getting in trouble for some stupid lapse of judgment he had. I immediately clipped the bucket back to the line and began feeding it back to him. When I saw it made it to the treehouse, I sat back on my bed. "Here, take it. I don't want it." Tim said nothing back. "Tim?" There was an eerie silence, and then I heard the familiar sound of the bucket being unclipped and set down. I tried calling him a couple more times, but he wouldn't respond. Yet I knew he was there. Despite his silence, I could faintly hear labored breathing. "Tim, stop. You're creeping me out. Maybe you should go back home." My pulse quickened at his repeated silence. Then the fact that it was very late dawned on me. Tim never came here after 10 o'clock, and his weird behavior coupled with that made me very uncomfortable. "One more thing before I go," Tim whispered suddenly, making me jump. I heard the squeak of the clothesline moving. I looked out the window. This went on for a moment, but the bucket wasn't coming my way. "Hey, what are you sending?" I said into the tin can, but was again met with the unnerving silence. I sat back on my bed, then felt something small drop on my shoulder. It was wet, so I looked at the clothesline and noticed something looked off. The light from my bedside lamp was too low to illuminate it, so I grabbed a flashlight. Shining the light on the clothesline, I suppressed a scream when I saw the clothesline was covered in blood. I had to wait a second to calm myself down. Whatever game Tim was playing, I needed him to stop. Just as I stood up to look out my window again, I heard the familiar sound of my doorknob turning. My heart leapt into my chest as I turned. "Honey?" The sound of my mom's voice echoed into the room. She peered in, and I instantly felt relief. "I'm awake. You have a visitor." Cold needles pricked my skin as I saw Ted walk into the room, a puzzled look on his face. "Josh? You're not in the treehouse?" A blanket of icy needles made me visibly shiver as I turned to look back at the treehouse. There was a light on inside, illuminating the face of a ghastly creature covered in dark smoke. He smiled back at me and waved a bloody hand. I rolled to the floor to avoid the creature's gaze. I felt like I would go insane if I looked at it any longer. "Josh, what's the matter?" My mom rushed over to me. I don't remember much about the rest of that night, but I do remember stuttering out the entirety of what had happened. Apparently, Tim saw a shadowy figure climb into the treehouse. He begged his parents to bring him over to see if I was in my room so that we'd know if it was a prowler. My dad had rushed outside with a gun, but found nothing except the bucket with a Ouija board still inside. He promptly burned it. My mom didn't tell me until later, but they researched the history of our home and found out there used to be a cult that lived in our house. They used the tree in our backyard for ritual sacrifices, some of which include hanging people from one of the tree limbs. The next day, my dad destroyed the treehouse, and we never played in that backyard again. For years, my dad swore he had heard chanting and an occasional scream from that awful tree. He took it one step further and cut the tree down. Even then, he would sometimes hear the rhythmic creak of the wood as if something was swaying to and from a phantom limb. Thank you so much for listening. Please like the video and subscribe for more horror stories.